He commanded artillery in Afghanistan, but years later his name was erased from the archives and his achievements were attributed to someone else. When the veteran wrote, "He stole this," in marker directly on the commemorative plaque, he was arrested. But the photo ended up online, and a storm began. Who is he really? Why was he silenced for 20 years? And will the court acknowledge that the country betrayed its own hero? The shoebox sat on the top shelf, taped shut but still puffing dust from its corners. Inside, under yellowed newspaper clippings and brittle certificates, lay the fragments of a man who once commanded thunder. Colonel Everett Mason, U.S. Army, retired, hadn't opened that box in years. His fingers hovered over it now, arthritic, trembling slightly, before pulling it down. The metals still gleamed in places where his thumb had once rubbed them for luck. Bronze Star. Army Commendation Medal. Purple Heart, with a pin that never sat straight. Below them, the headline from the Stars and Stripes article dated August 2002. Artillery Ace Mason brings the rain, fire support saves Kandahar unit. He read it again. Just once. Folded it back with care. And then he turned back to the window, cracked glass, view of the alley, the usual. A homeless man rifled through a dumpster below, and Everett nodded slightly. "Won't be long," he muttered. The room around him smelled like boiled cabbage and liniment. The radiator clicked like distant gunfire. A peeling note taped to the fridge reminded him of his upcoming VA appeal hearing. Except the date had passed. Again. The notice denying his benefits sat open on the table, its language painfully bureaucratic. After a comprehensive review of case #A45-02-301, we regret to inform you that sufficient documentation to verify service-related injury or eligibility could not be located. Please contact Records Division to initiate further inquiry. He had contacted them dozens of times. The woman on the phone last month had even chuckled. "Sir, we don't have anything on a Colonel Everett Mason." "Are you sure that's how you spell it?" Yes. He was sure. He walked with a limp now, a legacy of shrapnel in his right thigh. The VA surgeon called it residual discomfort, which sounded like something a person could shake off. But Everett knew pain intimately. It never left. It just changed masks. He once directed a battalion's fire from the rooftop of a bombed-out schoolhouse under rocket attack. He once pulled 3 wounded soldiers from a burning personnel carrier while mortar rounds fell like hail. Now he spent his days microwaving soup in a room that vibrated with the footsteps of the tenants above. Everett sat down on the edge of the bed, its springs whining. The mattress sagged like his spine. He pulled off his boot and winced, swollen again. He'd meant to call the clinic for weeks. But they never returned his messages. Or when they did, they told him to bring proper documentation. What documentation? His DD-214 was filed. His appeal was pending. His records, somehow, were missing. One morning, 6 months ago, his pension simply stopped. Direct deposit vanished. When he called to ask why, the hold music lasted 3 hours before the call dropped. By then, the rent was overdue. Then came the threats. Then the eviction. Everett wasn't the kind to beg, but he'd asked his old CO for help. The man was polite, but distant. "I'd love to assist, Everett, but I'm just not sure what you're asking. Everything's handled digitally now." Digitally. As if a man's life could be reduced to bytes and server errors. He tried the VA again, waiting in line with men half his age who stared into their phones and called him "sir" like it was a joke. One clerk looked at his paperwork and said, "Honestly, sir, if there's no record, there's nothing I can do." "I'm sorry. No record." He had slept under foreign skies with a sidearm on his chest and a radio in his ear. He had buried brothers. He had fired coordinates that changed the outcome of battles. But now, he was an empty folder in a gray government cabinet. He pulled out the Bronze Star again. Ran his thumb along its ridges. Then set it gently on the table, beside a stack of unpaid electric bills. He served with honor. But honor didn't pay rent. It started with the medal. Pawned for $42. The men behind the bulletproof glass didn't even blink when Everett slid it across the counter. He turned it over once, muttered something about market saturation, then handed Everett the bills like he was buying junk parts. Everett didn't argue. He folded the bills and left. He spent 20 of them on food, a loaf of bread, 2 cans of beans, a jar of instant coffee, and a bruised apple from a corner store that smelled like cigarettes and despair. He took the rest to a rundown boarding house on Cherry Street, where the woman at the desk looked at him like he was contagious. One night, she said. No smoking. No guests. The room had a bed, a bulb swinging from the ceiling, and walls so thin he could hear the man next door talking to himself. Everett lay on top of the covers, staring at the ceiling until sleep came in broken waves. That was 3 weeks ago. The rest of the medals followed. So did his field watch, the folding knife with the engraved handle, the leather belt that had once held a sidearm. By the end of the month, he had nothing left to sell but stories. And no one was buying those. When the money ran out, the streets took him. He learned quickly where to find soft cardboard, which alleys didn't flood in the rain, which gas stations had clerks who'd let him use the bathroom without calling the cops. He slept behind dumpsters, in park pavilions, under bridges where the wind never stopped howling. He layered clothes donated from churches and charities, the sleeves always too long or too short. He wrapped plastic bags around his socks to keep his feet dry. On bad nights, the pain in his leg flared until he bit down on his sleeve just to keep quiet. On worse nights, the memories came, not in dreams, but as flashes behind his eyes, men screaming over radios, the taste of grit and blood, smoke curling from sand-colored uniforms. And then came the hunger. Not the ache of a missed meal, that passed quickly. Real hunger was different. It was hollow and furious, a gnawing panic that turned hours into slow torture. Everett once hallucinated a roast chicken walking beside him. Another time he picked up a discarded cheeseburger from a trash can, peeled off the fuzz, and ate it cold. He didn't care anymore. One morning, he dragged himself to the city clinic. He hadn't eaten in 2 days and was coughing up something dark. He waited in the hallway, head lowered, coat zipped to his chin. When they finally called his name, a nurse wrinkled her nose and said, "You'll need ID and proof of income." "I don't have income," he rasped. "Then you'll need to fill out a financial disclosure form." "I've done that. Twice." The nurse tapped on a keyboard for a moment, then shook her head. "I'm sorry. There's nothing in the system." The words again. That system. That ghost. He left, shoulders hunched against the wind, and walked 5 miles to City Hall for a Veterans Affairs open session. He stood in line for an hour, behind men in clean jackets with neat folders. When he finally stepped up to the mic, the councilwoman running the session asked him to speak up. "I served in the 131st Fire Battalion. Operation Iron Mantle. My pension was cut. No one's helping me." She blinked. "Do you have your case number?" "No. Just my name." Her smile was the bureaucratic kind, polite and dismissive. "I'd recommend contacting the VA's main line. We don't handle federal cases here." He opened his mouth, but she was already calling the next name. Behind him, someone muttered, "Another nut job." Later that night, Everett sat on the steps of the War Memorial downtown, a marble crescent inscribed with names of the fallen. He'd been part of the fundraising effort 2 decades earlier. Helped choose the quote etched into the stone, "We remember because they gave everything." Now a security guard in a yellow jacket tapped him with a flashlight. "You can't sleep here, man." "I helped build this place," Everett whispered. "I don't care. Move along." "I was there. Kandahar. Fallujah. You want a citation? Move along." He stood up slowly, bones aching, and shuffled away into the dark. He was invisible now. Not even a shadow. They didn't just forget him. They erased him. It was supposed to be a quiet morning. The city had just installed a new bronze plaque in Patriot Square, a tribute to Operation Iron Mantle, commemorating its 20th anniversary. Everett passed by the plaza purely by accident. He'd spent the night tucked behind a shuttered cafe, and his feet had led him here like muscle memory. The plaque gleamed in the pale sunlight, polished to perfection. Tourists snapped photos. A small girl placed a flower at the base. Everett moved closer, limping, jaw clenched against the pane. And then he saw the name. Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Fields, Unit Commander, 131st Fire Battalion. He froze. The words shimmered, as if taunting him. He read them twice, then a third time. Raymond Fields hadn't commanded that unit. Everett Mason had. He felt heat rise in his chest, the world narrowing to a tight tunnel. The sounds of traffic, laughter, and birds faded under the roar of a memory, hot wind, mortar fire, shouted coordinates, the smell of scorched earth. Kandahar. 2002, they were pinned under heavy enemy fire, 4 squads spread too thin. Everett had radioed for extraction, but command was scrambled. So he did what command wouldn't, led the counter-barrage himself. Crawled out under fire to realign a howitzer battery. Saved a platoon with a perfect salvo. Raymond Fields. He'd been back at base, out with a stomach bug, according to the after-action report. But when the awards were handed out, Fields took the podium. Everett hadn't protested. He was a soldier. He followed the chain of command. But that morning, 20 years later, something cracked. He dropped his plastic bag of empty bottles. Pulled a black marker from his coat, he always carried one for notes or begging signs, and stepped forward. Hands shaking, he scribbled 3 words under the plaque. He stole this. Then he reached into his shirt, pulled out the dog tag that still hung on a fraying cord around his neck, and laid it gently on the pedestal. He took a step back, stared at the words. Someone gasped behind him. A tourist with a camera began filming. Another man in a business suit shouted, "Hey! You can't do that." Everett didn't move. He stood straight, spine locked like it once had been on parade. 2 security officers appeared, flanking him. "Sir, did you write this?" one asked. "Yes," Everett said simply. "We're going to need to detain you." He nodded. As they cuffed his wrists, slow and careful, like they weren't sure if he'd break, someone in the gathering crowd called out, "What's he talking about?" "I was the commander," Everett said, loud enough for the phone cameras now pointed at him. "And I have the scars to prove it." Then the crowd parted as a woman in a denim jacket stepped forward. She wasn't filming. She was watching. Her name was Marisol Lane, a freelance journalist covering urban homelessness and veterans' rights. She'd come looking for stories in shelters and soup kitchens. She hadn't expected to find one unraveling in real time, at a war memorial. She saw the tag, saw the trembling man with a jaw like carved granite, and the way he looked not at the cameras but at the plaque, like it had betrayed him. She snapped a photo of the vandalism. Of the marker. Of the name. Of the man. That photo went online that night. By morning, it had gone viral. Homeless veteran arrested for defacing plaque, but is he the real hero? The caption under Marisol's photo read, "The man in cuffs says he commanded the 131st. His name isn't on the memorial, but it's on his chest." Thousands of comments. Debates. Some called him a liar. Others wanted proof. But most asked one thing. Who is Everett Mason? And for the first time in nearly 2 decades. Someone was asking. They processed him like he was nobody. Fingerprint. Mugshot. Disturbing the peace. Vandalism of public property. His wrists ached from the cuffs, his stomach from hunger. The cell was cold, cement gray, the fluorescent lights humming like insects. Everett Mason sat on the bench with his arms folded across his chest and waited, not for pity, not even for release. He waited to be seen. On the other side of the city, Marisol Lane couldn't stop staring at the photograph. She zoomed in on the dog tag in her shot, the name etched into metal, Mason, Everett J. Then she looked again at the plaque from the square. The names didn't match, but the story didn't make sense. Why would a homeless man deface a memorial in broad daylight and then claim it was his? She started digging. That night, she found a dusty PDF from an old military newsletter archived by a veterans advocacy group. It contained a single paragraph about then Colonel Everett Mason, who had received commendation for leadership in the Kandahar offensive of August 2002. And just below it, redacted text. Marisol's pulse quickened. She contacted Veterans for Justice, a nonprofit that had helped her verify stories in the past. Within hours, they confirmed it. Mason's records had been lost in a system migration in 2011. The VA database had no digital trace of his command. No benefits. No discharge paperwork. No pension. He had been wiped out by a clerical ghost. The next morning, she stood in court with a press badge clipped to her jacket. The courtroom was nearly empty. Everett sat beside a weary public defender who barely glanced at the charge sheet. "Mr. Mason, the state is offering to drop charges if you agree to a 6-month ban from Patriot Square and complete community service." Everett didn't flinch. "No." The judge, a tired man with a buzz cut and watery eyes, raised a brow. "You're refusing the deal." "I want a hearing." The public defender sighed audibly. "Your Honor." "I want it on record," Everett interrupted, voice low but firm. "My name. My rank. My story." The judge stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "So ordered." Outside the courthouse, Marisol approached. "Colonel Mason," she said gently. He looked at her through narrowed eyes. "You're the one with the camera. I'm also the one who believes you." He said nothing. "I think there's a bigger story here. And I want to help tell it." He studied her for a long time, then nodded once. Within 48 hours, her article went live. "The Lost Commander: How Bureaucracy Erased a War Hero." Everett Mason commanded the 131st Fire Battalion during Operation Iron Mantle. His name is not on the monument. His pension vanished a decade ago. His medals were sold to survive. And yet, his service is verified by paper records buried in archives the VA never digitized. The piece exploded across veteran forums, local news outlets, and even national blogs. Retired soldiers began to write in. One of them, Sergeant Marvin Kessler, a radio technician from Mason's unit, reached out directly. "I still have the tapes," he told Marisol. "Field logs from Kandahar. They're analog, but you can hear his voice giving the coordinates. He saved us." Marisol met Kessler at his home in Queens. Together, they played the scratchy tape on an old recorder. "Charlie, 3, adjust azimuth. Target lock confirmed. Fire in sequence. This is Mason. I repeat, this is Mason, splash incoming. Clear as day." Another soldier sent a photo of a field operation report, hand-signed by Colonel Everett Mason, dated 3 days after the date on the plaque. Dozens more came forward, testimony after testimony, email after email. The story was out. It couldn't be stopped. Local news picked it up. Then national radio. Even a late-night show host mentioned it in a monologue. "A war hero wiped out by a printer error, someone give this man his benefits back in a damn parade." Back in court, Everett sat quietly while his defender read a motion to dismiss the charges. "This man is not a criminal," she said. "He is a forgotten name in our nation's ledger. A casualty of a system that erased its own." The courtroom was silent. Even the judge shifted in his chair. For the first time, Everett looked less like a ghost, and more like a man the world had started to remember. The hearing was held in the same municipal building where they'd once ignored him. Only this time, the chairs were full. Veterans in worn jackets filled the rows, some with walkers, some in wheelchairs, all silent, watchful. Reporters lined the back wall. Marisol sat near the front, notebook in hand, her eyes locked on the man at the center of it all. Everett Mason. He sat upright in a charcoal gray suit borrowed from a church outreach program, medals pinned neatly on his chest, not for display, but defiance. He looked older than the photos now circulating online, but more alive than he had in years. The city council had called a special session in response to the public outcry. Emails had flooded in. So had letters, hundreds of them. From soldiers. From families. From children who had learned Everett's name in history class just days before. At the center of the proceedings stood Councilwoman Renner, the same official who had once waved him off with a smile and a script. Her tone was different now. "Mr. Mason," she began, "we recognize that a grave error may have occurred. This hearing is to consider the evidence brought forth regarding your service, your pension, and your representation, or lack thereof, in public records." Everett didn't flinch. A lawyer for the Department of Veterans Affairs spoke next, carefully choosing his words. Our internal review confirms a case file was lost during the 2011 database transition. Colonel Mason's service in Operation Iron Mantle was, and is, authentic. The VA deeply regrets the oversight. Murmurs in the crowd. Everett's public defender stood and spoke. Authentic? That word doesn't account for 10 years of suffering. This man was left to rot while someone else wore his accolades. Then came the testimonies. One by one, his former comrades took the stand: Sergeant Kessler, with the tape recorder; Lieutenant Donna Ruiz, who'd once ridden with Mason in a convoy under fire; Corporal James Lowe, who recalled Mason pulling him from wreckage when enemy rounds lit the sky. He never once asked for credit, Lowe said. He just asked us to live. The recordings were played aloud in the chamber. Everett's voice echoed from the dusty past, clear, commanding, calm. Gasps. Silence. Councilwoman Renner cleared her throat. Mr. Mason, would you care to say anything? Everett rose slowly. The room leaned toward him. I didn't come here to ask for pity, he began. I didn't even come for an apology. I came because someone had to say, enough. Enough silence. Enough forgetting. You don't erase a man's name and expect him to stay buried. He scanned the faces. This wasn't just about me. There are others. Veterans sleeping in parks. Dying on wait lists. Vanishing from systems built to honor them. If you fix this, fix all of it. Applause broke the stillness. Someone shouted, that's right. Councilwoman Renner stood again. Colonel Mason, on behalf of the City of New York and the Department of Veterans Affairs, we formally acknowledge your command in Operation Iron Mantle. Your benefits will be retroactively reinstated with full back pay. And your name? She paused. Will replace Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Fields on the Patriot Square Memorial. Permanently. Everett didn't react at first. Just blinked slowly. Then he nodded. It's not about the plaque, he said. It's about the truth standing on its own. As the hearing closed, cameras flashed. Veterans came to shake his hand. A young Marine saluted him, tears brimming. Everett returned it, slow and firm. Outside, the street buzzed with energy. Protesters held signs, justice for the forgotten, where are the other Everetts? And in that moment, Everett Mason was no longer invisible. Not just because the city saw him, but because he had made it see itself. The bronze caught the morning sun like it had been waiting for him. Patriot Square was quieter than usual, the city seeming to hold its breath. Rows of folding chairs stretched toward the memorial, filled with veterans, city officials, journalists, and strangers who only knew Everett Mason by what they'd read. But they came. To hear. To see. To witness. At the base of the statue, a new plaque had been installed, polished, centered, permanent. Colonel Everett J. Mason. Commander, 131st Fire Battalion, Operation Iron Mantle. Truth does not fade. It waits. Everett sat in the front row in a charcoal gray suit, the same one from the hearing. He leaned forward slightly in his wheelchair, eyes on the plaque, hands folded over a simple wooden cane. Marisol stood off to the side with her notebook closed for once. She wasn't here as a reporter today. She was here as a friend. A city official stepped up to the microphone and spoke, thanking everyone for attending. He recited Everett's service history, the commendations, the decades of duty, the years lost to silence. But Everett barely heard the words. He was focused on the inscription. On the names beside his. On the space that had once denied his presence. When he was called forward, Everett took his time. His body didn't move like it used to, but his voice, when he reached the podium, was strong. I don't need statues, he said. I need it to be believed. He looked out over the crowd. This plaque isn't just for me. It's for everyone who disappeared into red tape. For every soldier who went home to nothing. We don't want pity. We want recognition. And a chance to live with dignity. There was no applause right away. Just stillness. Then one clap. Then another. Until the whole crowd stood. As he turned to leave, a young boy broke through the rows and stood before him, eyes wide. Were you really a colonel? Everett smiled gently, rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. I still am." And as the wind moved through the square, someone in uniform raised a hand in salute. They had tried to bury him. But he was the seed.